We are going to close the show out today with a few rulings from the Supreme Court. One of them terrific, one of them horrible. We're going to lead with the horrible one. I hope that you guys enjoy poop water, because shit will soon be making it into your drinking water. U.S. Supreme Court weakens rules on discharge of raw sewage into water supplies. Who does this benefit, dude? How can anyone look me in the face and tell me that this is good? No, I love drinking shit. I love having poop particles coming out of my sink. I love showering and getting hit with fucking dinkleberries. Who does this serve to benefit? Obviously, rhetorical. Corporations, because they don't have to fucking worry about disposing of their waste properly. Instead, they can just dump it into a fucking stream that's behind someone's house. The U.S. Supreme Court has weakened rules on the discharge of raw sewage into water supplies in a 5-4 ruling that undermines the 1972 Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act is the principal law governing pollution control and water quality of the nation's waterways. The Republican supermajority court ruled on Tuesday that the EPA cannot employ generic water body focused pollution discharge limits to Clean Water Act permit holders and must provide specific limitations to pollution permittees. The ruling is a win for San Francisco, which challenged non-specific or quote-unquote narrative wastewater permits that the EPA issues to protect the quality of surface water sources like rivers and streams relied upon for drinking water. In a 5-4 ruling written by Justice Samuel Alito, the court blocked the EPA from issuing permits that make a permittee responsible for surface water quality, or quote end result permits, a new term coined by the court. This is so fucking stupid. This is so dumb. This is like, how are these people able to just like, how are these people able to be so fucking stupid, man? I can't ask again. Who does this benefit? Quote, the agency has adequate tools to obtain needed information from permittees without resorting to end result requirements, wrote Alito, who was joined by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, who joined part of the majority opinion. The EPA issued San Francisco a permit allowing it to discharge pollutants from its combined sewer systems into the Pacific Ocean. The permit's conditions included prohibitions on discharges that contribute to a violation of acceptable water quality standards. The permit included generic prohibitions on the impacts of water quality as part of the EPA's efforts to halt San Francisco's release of raw sewage into the Pacific Ocean during rainstorms. San Francisco has challenged these conditions, arguing the EPA lacks statutory authority to impose them. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in July 2023 upheld the EPA's authority to issue generic limits on discharges under the Clean Water Act. San Francisco took the case to the Supreme Court. Maybe it's a hot take, but poop should not be in water. Poop should not permeate drinking water. I don't know, like, am I some fucking weirdo for not wanting to go back to the days of the Oregon Trail where motherfuckers just die of dysentery? The case drew the attention of powerful business groups, including the National Mining Association and Chamber of Commerce, which wrote amicus briefs in support of San Francisco's position. Of course they did, because corporations now don't have to worry about spending extra money to adequately dispose of their waste. It was the first case to grapple with Clean Water Act regulations since the court struck down Chevron defense in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo in July 2024, though it was barely mentioned during oral arguments. Quote, the city is wrong, according to Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who wrote the dissenting opinion, which was joined by the three Democrat justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. The relevant position of the Clean Water Act directs the EPA to impose any more stringent limitation that is necessary to meet or required to implement any acceptable water quality standards. The EPA are the authority in environmental regulation. Like, that is the fucking job of the people that work at that agency, is to understand what limits of certain things are safe. If they want to come out and say that, no, you can't have any poop in your drinking water, they have the authority to say that, because the city and these businesses should not be allowed to contaminate the drinking water of the people who live in that city and rely on that water. Now, the other decision came on USAID. The justices, who was it that got really spicy? I believe it was Samuel Alito, was tweaking over the result of this. Literally fucking tweaking.
This decision was pretty technical, but it really reveals a lot about the divides within the court itself. This is the second time that Trump's efforts to reshape the federal government have gone up to the high court. And here specifically, the Trump administration was asking the court to keep foreign aid frozen, but the court declined to do that. They actually sent that whole issue back down to the lower court to decide if those funds need to be released. Now, this is the second time that the Supreme Court has declined to intervene.
This is, I should have mentioned this in the beginning, this is about USAID. The Supreme Court ruled that Trump has no business, or that Trump cannot freeze all of this foreign aid
on Trump's behalf. But I want to note the larger questions about what Trump can and cannot do with Doge, with this kind of foreign aid. There are no
larger questions. Oh my fucking God, dude. It's very simple. It's laid out in plain text. Congress has the power of the purse. They dictate and allocate the spending. If spending is approved, the president cannot decide to unapprove it. That's not how this works. The whole idea of freezing money that has already been agreed upon is unconstitutional. And that is why the court ruled in favor, or ruled against Donald Trump on this issue.
Those questions have not been answered. The Supreme Court has not weighed in on what we call the merits, or the larger constitutional questions. That's going to take some time. But again, twice they've asked the Supreme Court to help them out, and twice they have declined.
And basically, correct me if I'm wrong, the House of Representatives and the Senate both passed authorizing legislation for these billions of dollars in foreign aid. Then they passed separate appropriations bills, and then the president signed both bills into law. The Supreme Court saying, if you want to change that, there's got to be additional legislation on the Hill and more action by the president.
So I think eventually the Supreme Court will have to get at that issue. Right now, the issue they're deciding is really whether a district court judge can compel the administration to pay these billions of dollars in foreign aid that they're saying they don't want to. So it's interesting. There was a really lengthy dissent in this decision where 4 conservative justices were sort of outraged at the idea that a district court could compel the administration to do that. Eventually, though, they will have to answer these larger constitutional questions that you just touched on. If Congress, appropriates these funds, can the administration just say, no, we're not going to send them out? Those questions will likely take a few months to get to the court.
The president cannot say that. The president cannot say that. It's written in the Constitution. And if the Supreme Court ever does decide to weigh in on this, and they rule against what's written in the Constitution, they will, any shred of credibility will be gone, because they are no longer the independent arbiters of what's legal and not. At that point, they are simply partisan hacks and an extension of the Republican Party.
Because it has to go back to the lower court and work its way through the system. And the Supreme Court really isn't looking to jump the line right now.
Yeah, that would be the bigger constitutional question, right? What is the direct impact then of this?
So right now it's going to go back down to the lower court, and the litigation over this larger question will begin. And the district court can decide if the administration has to disperse these funds. I think what really stood out to me in this decision, though, is again, this is very preliminary. This is a very technical issue. We're not answering these larger questions yet about the separation of powers. But four justices, they all got together and they wrote a really powerful dissent. And what's notable about that is this is, again, like I said, it's not a minor decision, but it's not a massive decision. And the fact that they all took time to really lay out why they disagree with the majority, that signals that there really are pretty entrenched partisan divides on this court. And that will be incredibly significant when these larger...
You mean to tell me that the Supreme Court that had 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump is extremely partisan? Oh my God. Who could have known? This is groundbreaking information, man. It's so crazy that a bunch of conservative justices would be upset that they didn't get their way, because conservatives always fucking cry and bitch and moan and play the victim when something doesn't go their way.
Constitutional questions do come before them in the usual formal way where there are arguments and a big opinion. Because I know from talking to my sources at the Trump White House, their long game for all of these efforts with DOJ and reshaping the federal government are designed to eventually go before the Supreme Court, and they expect that they will likely side with President Trump. It's going to be that's a long game, that's a long path, but that's how all of this has been designed. They knew these would be challenged in court. They didn't expect to win initially, but they do expect to win at the high court.
Joining us now is CNN.
Okay, she was correct in that sense. However, it is much bigger than that. This is not just a project of the Trump administration. This has been a Republican project since the 1980s. They created the Federalist Society, which exists only to churn out conservative justices who will interpret the Constitution in the most conservative, fundamentalist way possible. They worked tirelessly for decades just to get to Roe v. Wade, to overturn Roe v. Wade. And now they are further extending that with Project 2025. She was correct. The whole purpose of packing the court is to have them side your way when it comes to certain issues. And if it gets to the Supreme Court and you have a supermajority in the Supreme Court, you basically have carte blanche to do whatever the fuck you want, so long as the justices are amoral and operate exclusively on political lines, along party lines, much like Clarence Thomas does, much like Brett Kavanaugh does. But this is really interesting, because I don't know if this sets like a precedent. I don't think this is, I mean, it doesn't really set a precedent, but like it kind of does, because the Supreme Court strikes this down and it goes to a lower court judge again. What happens when they strike it down? It's I don't think the Trump administration is just going to let it go away. They're not. I don't think they're just going to take their loss and be like, "Damn, well, we'll get him next time." Like, does it go back up to the Supreme Court? Like, I literally don't know how this works. All right, I'm uneducated in this specific instance, because I always thought that if the Supreme Court strikes something down, it's dead. It goes to the highest court. And if the highest court in the land says that you can't do this, you can't do this. So I'm intrigued to see how this is gonna play out.